Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it.
Because that's what they think. They think that if you believe in God, there's something wrong with your brain, okay? You're an idiot. And so I'm gonna make fun of you as an idiot, as you being an idiot. And so that's why I say it's the equivalent of making fun of, for them, it's the equivalent of making fun of like a disabled person,
Are you kidding me? This is asinine. You are insane. But of course, I don't really believe that he thinks that this is a valid analogy. Again, he's trying to smear the atheist community here. Atheists are the kind of people who are willing to laugh at the disabled. Not only is that just a gross assertion, but the analogy is appalling. It does not work, even on a rudimentary level.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arms.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all most welcome to another episode of The Most Annoying Religious People. Up for today is one Reza Aslan, a practicing Muslim and religious scholar to boot. He is in fact an expert in the study of religions, or the academic study of religions, so one would expect this guy to have some pretty smart stuff to say about religion or the lack thereof. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Mr. Aslan has a whole host of views and beliefs and ideas about atheism and atheists that leave a hell of a lot to be desired. But as per usual, dear listener, I'll leave you be the ultimate judge. Let's dive right into Reza Aslan's ideas on atheism.
It seems that some of the harshest comedy is not actually between religions, but between believers and non-believers. Mm-hmm. You've obviously spent some time with Bill Maher. I've never seen a dog with a bone as much as Bill Maher and anti-religion. Where do you think that sort of tenaciousness for a lot of atheists comes from when dealing with people of faith?
First of all, let me fix the a lot of atheists part, because we now actually have data on this. So Bill Maher, I've written a lot about this. He's quite open about it. He's not an atheist. He's an anti-theist. Right. And the difference between an atheist and an anti-theist is an atheist doesn't believe in God. An anti-theist believes that religion is an insidious evil. It's an irrational force in society, and it needs to be removed forcibly if necessary. That's what Bill Maher is.
And right out of the gate here, we've got a massive straw man and misrepresentation of who Bill Maher is as a thinker. And I would argue, definitionally speaking, that he's also gotten anti-theism wrong. So, first of all, he says that Bill Maher is not an atheist, he's an anti-theist. I've got news for you, Reza. Anti-theists are atheists as well. They just so happen to be the kind of atheists who think that religion is harmful as well as being untrue. They're the kind of atheists who would like to see a world without religion. But you added an extra thing there, didn't you? Because your goal is to smear and besmirch. This is just so bloody ugly. He says that anti-theists think that religion should be removed from society using force, if necessary.
An anti-theist believes that religion is an insidious evil. It's an irrational force in society, and it needs to be removed forcibly if necessary.
I defy you, dear listener, because Reza Aslan is probably never going to see this, but if you're a supporter of Reza and you think that Reza is correct here, I defy you. Find me one clip, just one clip, or quote, or anything at all from Bill Maher that indicates that he's in favour of using force to rid society of religion. Here's my contention. You won't find it. You will not find it.
There's so much talk about wiping out ISIS. You can't. Not with bombs. You can only expose that something is a bad idea. Cultures are different. It's okay to judge that rule of law isn't just different than theocracy. It's better. If you don't see that, you're either a religious fanatic or a masochist. But one thing you are certainly not is a liberal. To count yourself as a liberal, you have to stand up for liberal principles, free speech, separation of church and state. Freedom to practice any religion or no religion without the threat of violence.
Could there potentially be anti-theists out there who are willing to be violent or who are willing to use force? Hey, look, it's a weird, wonderful and bizarre world, and there's a hell of a lot of people out there. There's probably violent people out there in every possible group. I mean, if you can get Buddhists who are violent, then you can probably get someone from any group who's willing to be bloody violent, right? So, what a cheap claim that would be, the idea that there might be a violent anti-theist or an anti-theist out there somewhere who might be willing to use violence. All I'm saying here, folks, is that this doesn't typify the anti-theists I'm familiar with. People like Christopher Hitchens. Look at the work of Christopher Hitchens and ask yourself, did he ever promote, did he ever argue in favour of using force to rid the world of religion?
My question is to Christopher is how you can justify wanting to take something away from people from 95 that gives meaning to 95% of the American people and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people.
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so. As Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
Christopher Hitchens spent his life debating with religious people. Not his entire life, but certainly the vast majority of his final years were spent in discussion with religious people. Christopher Hitchens relished conversation, debate, the free exchange of ideas. And he's the poster child for anti-theism. I don't know what Reza is talking about here. This is utterly bizarre. So he completely besmirches Bill Maher's name by suggesting that he's willing to use force to rid the world of religion, and then he besmirches the name of anti-theists more generally with this absolutely bogus definition of anti-theism that he's proposed here. A definition that I don't see reflected in the anti-theists that I know and follow. Like I said, you can probably find a violent atheist somewhere or a violent anti-theist somewhere, just like we can find violent religious people or religious people who who are willing to use force in many places. The question is whether or not that violence is caused by atheism. The question is whether or not that violence is being caused by the ideology or the belief or lack thereof that the person is subscribed to. Look, guys, this is just a really, really bad opening here for Mr. Aslan, and it just shows the bad faith that's on offer here. And this is something that I would indict Mr. Aslan with more generally. He doesn't argue in good faith. He argues in bad faith. When you start the conversation by poisoning the well in this way, you reveal yourself to be an insidious, unpleasant, arguably dishonest operator. Alleging that Bill Maher is in favour of using force to rid the world of religion is not only incorrect, it's appalling.
An anti-theist believes that religion is an insidious evil. It's an irrational force in society, and it needs to be removed forcibly if necessary. That's what Bill Maher is.
Freedom to practice any religion or no religion without the threat of violence. Without the threat of violence. Without the threat of violence.
To smear anti-theists, and I identify as an anti-theist. I've gone over and back on this quite a lot, dear listener, but I do think that religion is quite harmful, and I'm tempted, albeit not prepared fully to conclude, that the world might actually be a better place without religion. Certainly without particular religious ideas. But look, that's a conversation for another day. I just wanted to start off here by clarifying that Mr. Aslan is already in very, very deep waters. But let's not cast him aside just yet. Perhaps he's got some compelling reasons to support these ugly assertions that he has started with. Let's proceed and find out.
An anti-theist believes that religion is an insidious evil. It's an irrational force in society, and it needs to be removed forcibly if necessary. That's what Bill Maher is. That's what Sam Harris is. That's what Richard Dawkins is. And these guys are on TV, they make a lot of noise, but they're extremists. And for, I think, many, many years, a lot of American atheism was defined by these groups.
Oh my goodness gracious me. Richard Dawkins is an extremist. Really? Richard Dawkins, the Oxford biologist who spent his entire life studying evolution and writing books on the subject. Yes, he's dipped his toes into the God debate. Well, you might say, dear listener, that he jumped headfirst into the swimming pool of the God debate. But you're going to call him an extremist? What comes to your mind when somebody uses the word extremist? This is a question for you, dear listener. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when somebody deploys the word extremist? I'll tell you what comes to my mind. Violence comes to my mind. Terrorism comes to my mind. A lack of care for human life and a willingness to kill in the name of a cause comes to my mind. And a whole host of other unpleasant, brutal thoughts come to mind. And Reza Aslan wants to call Richard Dawkins an extremist. Get the fuck out of here. Get out of here, Reza. That is insane.
But even if Hitler was an atheist, so what? Hitler was also a vegetarian. Does that suggest that vegetarians have a special tendency to be murderous, bigoted racists? The point is that there is a logical pathway leading from religion to the committing of atrocities. It's perfectly logical. If you believe that your religion is the right one, you believe that your God is the only God, and you believe that your God has ordered you, through a priest or through a holy book, to kill somebody, to blow somebody up, to fly a plane into a skyscraper, then you are doing a righteous act. You're a good person. You're following your religious morality. There is no such logical pathway leading from atheism or secularism to any such atrocious act. It just doesn't follow.
Richard Dawkins' crime is that he doesn't believe in God. And yes, he can be quite rude about it. Yes, he can be quite hostile in the sense that he explains himself with a kind of angry fervor, but Richard Dawkins wouldn't raise a finger to hurt a person. He wouldn't dream of bloodshed. He is clearly a humanistic, humanitarian individual. And you want to call him an extremist? What are you smoking? Of course, he's not smoking anything. This is Reza's game. Reza is in the game of besmirching people. He's in the game of smearing and slandering people. This is utterly despicable. Richard Dawkins, an extremist. Don't make me laugh. I'm sorry, guys. Can you tell me, dear listener? Jump into the comments below and tell me what he might be even talking about. Richard Dawkins, the extremist. The guy who spent his life, a lot like Christopher Hitchens, or many, many years of his life, simply discussing religion. Simply debating religion. Simply pushing back against theocracy and religious ideas that are evidentially bankrupt. So that makes a person an extremist now, Reza, does it? So I guess I'm an extremist as well. Guys, if you don't understand how dangerous this language is, I don't know what to say. Because if you're going to allege that somebody is an extremist and that label sticks, then paradoxically, we're actually not too far away from violence, even though Reza considers himself to be on the non-violent side of this discussion. If you're going to label Richard Dawkins an extremist and that catches on and people believe it, well, how do people treat extremists, folks? People assault them. Hashtag punch a Nazi, right? People throw milkshakes on them. People beat them up. People ostracize them. This is why Reza's speech on this subject is so toxic and so dangerous. By throwing around these labels willy-nilly the way Reza is doing, he's playing a very dangerous game. And worse still, I think he knows this. I think Reza knows the game that he's playing, but he doesn't care. I honestly don't think he cares. Calling Richard Dawkins an extremist is a very dangerous thing to do. That label comes with particular baggage, and it's going to give people a particular view, and it's going to poison their perception of that person. And like I've already said, this could very easily lead to violence. This is very dangerous speech. This is irresponsible speech. Now, for those of you who are going to jump on me here and say, but oh, Magic Skeptic, I thought that you were a free speech fundamentalist. I thought you were in favor of free speech. I am in favor of free speech. I wouldn't have Reza shut down for saying these things. I wouldn't have him cancelled, or I wouldn't have him silenced. I'm doing right now exactly what a person who disagrees with him should be doing. I'm pushing back. I'm articulating why he's wrong here and why it's completely inappropriate to say the things that he's saying. And all I've done is focus on Richard Dawkins for this particular response. But any of the other names he's mentioned, I'm happy to defend those as well. I won't go into them individually because it would make this video far too bloated. And the real truth here, dear listener, is that it's much easier to bullshit than it is to explain away bullshit. He could say many untrue things in a very short soliloquy, and it might take me hours to refute all of it. This is what's so gross about claims like this. You can just list off a bunch of names and assert that they're all extremists without a shred of evidence, I might add. And then it takes someone like me 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes to make a video to respond to the garbage that's been said, when in fact his video was only 3 or 4 minutes. This is something that irritates me, and I see it in the comments, and you might have seen it yourself in the comments of my videos, dear listener, but I get accused sometimes of being a bit long-winded and being a bit repetitious. And, you know, one commenter in a video recently reprimanded me for posting a 30-minute response to a 3-minute video. That 30-minute response wasn't as a consequence of my bloated speech. It wasn't as a consequence of me droning on too long. It was as a consequence of how long it takes to actually dissect and explain away the hogwash that was in that video. And I'm afraid to say, dear listener, the same is true with this particular clip with Mr. Aslan. It takes a hell of a lot longer to explain away the nonsense than it does to spout it. And all I've done here is address Richard Dawkins. He listed a whole bunch of other names as well and alleged that they're extremists. I would be happy to defend any of those other names as well, because I don't think this label of extremist adequately or appropriately applies to any of them. These are people with whom you have a disagreement, Mr. Aslan. That disagreement can be had without you labeling your interlocutors as extremists. Oh boy, this is gross. But look, I guess I'm just another hell-bent, fire-breathing extremist atheist myself. What do you think, dear listener? Let's move on.
Only about 15% of self-described atheists in America ascribe to anti-theism. So they are actually the minority voice. And I can't tell you how many atheists I have met who say, I don't believe in God, but I'm not an asshole. You know, like I don't have to be a dick about it. You know, like I don't believe in God. End of story. You know, you believe in God, go for it.
I'm not familiar with this data that he's citing, and to be honest, I'm not interested in addressing it because it's actually irrelevant to me what percentage of the atheist community identify as anti-theists. Fine, whatever, I'll just take his numbers for granted. The minority of atheists are anti-theists. Big whoop, fine. I would say, however, that one doesn't have to identify as an anti-theist to be an outspoken atheist. And I think that that might be an assumption that's undergirding his entire point here. Because the speaker, the person who's interviewing him, started off by talking about how many atheists, or a hell of a lot of atheists, are, you know, aggressive, or they're very outspoken, or they're very hostile to religion.
I've never seen a dog with a bone as much as Bill Maher and anti-religion. Where do you think that sort of tenaciousness for a lot of atheists comes from when dealing with people of faith?
And Reza immediately responded by saying, oh, no, the data is in on that. Only a minority of atheists actually identify as anti-theists.
First of all, let me fix the a lot of atheists part, because we now actually have data on this. And what we discovered was only about 15% of self-described atheists in America ascribe to anti-theism.
Right there, you can hear the assumption that it is only a person who identifies as an anti-theist who might conceivably be outspoken or say negative things about religion. But that's not necessarily the case. I know bunches of people who identify as atheists as opposed to anti-theists, and they're still outspoken. They still critique faith. They still have some choice words for religious types like Mr. Aslan here. And so, anyway, with that acknowledged, I'm just happy to accept these numbers. The minority of atheists are anti-theists. Fine, no big deal. The broader point I wanted to address here is this claim that there are many atheists who say, yeah, look, I don't believe in God, but I'm not an asshole about it. If you want to believe in God, go right ahead. Please notice the assumption that's at play in this particular point that he's making. The assumption being this: you're an asshole if you're an atheist and you challenge other people's beliefs. In other words, the only way you can be a quote-unquote good atheist is if you have a c'est la vie attitude. The only way you could be a good atheist is if you permit other people to believe whatever the hell they want to believe and you don't ever question them. You don't ever critique. You don't ever inquire or engage them. That's the only way you can be a good atheist. Well, I don't agree. I think this is nonsense. Now, I've addressed this point at great, or rather in great depth in other videos, so I'll just make this quite short and succinct here. I don't need to go into it in massive detail. All I'll say is this, guys. There's a hell of a lot of religious people who suffer as a consequence of their faith. A hell of a lot of religious people. I'll just give you one example, although there are many. And again, if you want to know my thoughts on this in full, you can check out many of my other videos where I've gone in depth on how religion can harm people and how this assumption that religion merely confers comfort is hogwash. It can actually go either way. I'm not saying that it can't give you comfort. It's just possible, like it is in the lives of millions of people, that your religion can in fact immiserate you. All right? So With that acknowledged, I'll just give you one example. The people who live in fear and continuous and constant existential anxiety about whether or not they're going to go to hell. The people who go to sleep every night and wake up screaming because they have nightmares about their skin burning off, regrowing and burning off again. The people who are terrified that they're not meeting an impossible standard, and so that, God might judge them negatively and they might go to hell. These people are rendered miserable. They're suffering from a form of PTSD, arguably speaking. And so when Reza assumes here that a good atheist is the kind of atheist who never questions a person's faith, what he's assuming there, a secondary assumption that's baked in, is that to question that person's faith is to harm them in some way. It's to rob them of their comfort. It's to rob them of something that gives them meaning and profundity. But here's the problem with that assumption. Go back to that one example I gave you. The millions of people who suffer in continuous existential anxiety about hell, those people would be liberated were you to convince them that their faith is hogwash. You would be liberating them from their existential anxiety. You would be liberating them from their torturous existence where they worry 24/7 about whether or not they're going to go to heaven or hell. Losing your faith doesn't and isn't always a painful thing. Every now and then, and I don't know what the numbers are, dear listener, I don't have the data in front of me. All I can tell you is that I'm one of them. Losing your faith can in fact be a liberation. It can be a net positive for your psychology, for your psychological health and your well-being. And so that's what I'm going to say in response to Mr. Aslan here. Am I really an asshole atheist if I liberate somebody from the ideology that's crushing them? Am I really an unpleasant or immoral atheist if I liberate somebody from the ideology that's immiserating them? I think not, Mr. Aslan. And I would have thought that a scholar of religion such as yourself would have given this a scintilla more thought than you have. But you've already shown your hand. You're not interested in having a rigorous and truthful discussion on these philosophical and theological matters. You're interested in besmirching and smearing the atheist community. And that's despicable. So I'm going to move on.
For Maher, as well as for these other anti-theists, because they believe that faith is the product of an irrational mind, their sort of making fun of it comes from that position, right? So it's the equivalent of making fun of a disabled person. Now, because that's what they think. They think that if you believe in God, there's something wrong with your brain, okay? Right. You're an idiot. And so I'm going to make fun of you as an idiot, as you being an idiot. And so that's why I say it's the equivalent of making fun of, for them, it's the equivalent of making fun of like a disabled person,
Are you kidding me? This is asinine. You are insane. But of course, I don't really believe that he thinks that this is a valid analogy. Again, he's trying to smear the atheist community here. Atheists are the kind of people who are willing to laugh at the disabled. Not only is that just a gross assertion, but the analogy is appalling. It does not work, even on a rudimentary level. Here's one big fat difference between your analogy and the reality, Mr. Aslan. There's no choice in that matter. They can't be convinced out of their disability. If somebody is in a wheelchair for life, making fun of them is appalling for many reasons, but it can't possibly serve any purpose. A disabled person in a wheelchair, in the case that I've just given you, they're in a wheelchair for life. Nothing can change that. Critiquing and making fun of a person who believes something silly actually has utility. You could change their mind. I used to be a theist, and I was deconverted by people like Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, who did admittedly poke fun and every now and then have a cheap laugh about theists. They engaged in ridicule. They ridiculed ridiculous ideas, which is exactly what one should do. And that deconverted me. In other words, your analogy flops hard here. Why? Because people's beliefs can change. People's disabilities cannot. This is a ridiculous, appalling disanalogy. It's garbage. Hot, steaming garbage. A person's disability cannot change, whereas a person's beliefs can. So ridiculing a person's beliefs could in fact be beneficial. Now, I'm not permitting all forms of ridicule. Some ridicule can probably go too far. Fine. But making fun or making light of somebody's religion can actually have positive utility. It changed my mind, Mr. Aslan. And to conflate making fun of somebody's ideas with making fun of somebody's disability status just shows what a sloppy thinker you are. One of those things is immutable, which is to say unchanging. It would be like making fun of somebody's race or making fun of somebody's, somebody's height. Let's just take that as another example. Now, is there a place for all of this on the stage coming out of the mouth of a comedian? Sure. I love comedy, and I love the comedy that focuses on the darkest and most controversial subject matter. I think that's the whole point of comedy. But in a sincere discussion and philosophical dialogue, to say that a disability and the making fun of that is analogous to a person's ridiculous belief and making fun of that is just the most ridiculous thing. It's the most ridiculous analogy I've heard in recent memory. I'm lost for words. It's utterly ridiculous. And given the fact that I'm lost for words, we're just going to have to move on here.
So he and company, they're the extremists of that side. They're the jihadists of...
They're the extremists who appear to be speaking for the majority, but who are not.
Right.
Yeah.
I love the interviewer's interjection here because it makes my point for me. What did I say earlier in the video about what comes to mind when the word extremist is used? I said that it generates, in my mind at the very least, thoughts of violence, thoughts of terrorism and brutality. And what does the interviewer interject with here? Oh, so basically they're the jihadis of the atheist community.
They're the extremists of that side. They're the jihadists.
So he's thinking the same thing. This is why Reza's ideas here, this is why Reza's presentation here is so appalling. By deploying the word extremist, everybody knows what that's a euphemism for. And the interviewer just demonstrated that with considerable clarity. You say the word extremist, but everybody thinks jihadi, everybody thinks terrorist, everybody thinks murderer, everybody thinks violence. And this is the label that Mr. Aslan is placing on the atheist community. And in so doing, he's coupling in people's minds, in the minds of people who might take him seriously because he is a scholar of religions. What is he coupling in their minds? He's coupling atheism with terrorism and violence. And in so doing, he's besmirching and smearing the atheist community. A community, Mr. Aslan, that could well do without you piling on, given the data, you love data, given the data we have on atheists being one of the least trusted groups in the United States. Atheists have been denigrated from the pulpit for centuries. The last thing they need, Mr. Aslan, is to be denigrated from academia as well. So please stop. Stop immediately, you moron.
And in having such a strong belief that there is no God and there should be no religion, isn't that just another kind of faith? Isn't there faith in
anti-theism is a religion.
And of course, we conclude with another absolutely ridiculous assertion. Anti-theism is a religion. What definition of religion do you think Reza Aslan is deploying here? Now, guys, I've said here on this channel a whole load of times, I've said it so many times that I've forgotten the number. Words don't have meanings, they have usages. right? I was talking about this in the comment thread the other day with a commenter, and I was trying to make the point that debating the meanings of words is kind of useless. And the analogy I used, imagine a person said that the highway is very important. Let's discuss the importance of the highway. Let's imagine they're discussing this with somebody who thinks that highways are in fact not particularly important. And that's the substance of the debate, whether or not highways are essential for the infrastructure of a functioning or healthy functioning society, right? Let's imagine, though, instead of debating the substance of that debate, whether or not highways are good, the interlocutor responded by saying, oh, no, they're not called highways, they're called motorways. And let's imagine then, dear listener, that the pair drift off into a protracted and prolonged discussion about which word is best to use when referring to those roads, highway, motorway, and then somebody else jumps in and says, well, I think you're both wrong, it should be called a freeway, right? That would be a meaningless discussion. That would be an absolute and colossal waste of time. Because the truth is, what we should be discussing is whether or not highways are important, or motorways are important, or freeways are important. Doesn't matter what word we use, so long as we know what idea is being pointed to. Now, that said, and I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here, slightly, I suspect. That said, it is possible for somebody to use language in such an appalling way that there might actually be some fertile ground worth covering there. So most semantic and word debates, in my view, are irrelevant. All that matters is the ideas. But when someone like Reza Aslan throws out a claim like anti-theism is a religion, I do have to ask him what the hell he's talking about. Now, religion is one of those nebulous terms that's notoriously difficult to define. When I studied religions myself in university, we spent an entire module on this, about how one defines religion, and whether you used a substantive definition, which is to say what something is, or whether or not you use a functionalist definition, which is to define something according to what it does. There's many different ways to define something, and no matter which definition you use, you'll always find that it either includes too much or excludes too much, and this is the problem. So, some people want to define religion as something that is very important to a person, that involves a collection of practices that the person holds dear, that it involves going to a particular building, and that it involves certain chants and certain hand movements, and something that somebody is, potentially willing to become violent for. There's all sorts of labels somebody might attach. Please notice, however, dear listener, that everything I just said there could apply to football, right? Football is something that people hold dear. It's something that involves a particular building, a stadium. It involves particular clothing, jerseys. It involves particular hand gestures, Mexican waves, particular chants, ole, 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 ole. It's something that people are willing to become violent in the name of, as football hooliganism is demonstrated with considerable clarity. So there's a lot of checks in the tick boxes there that football aligns with. And so is it a religion? I don't think so. I think one of the key elements, however you want to define it, I think your definition of religion must include the following: a supernatural element. I think the vast majority of religions, now remember, I've already said, before anybody jumps into the comments below, well, I know of a religion where there's no supernatural... Right, fine, I'm acknowledging that no definition is perfect. I'm acknowledging that, right? Every possible definition is going to either include too much or exclude too much. This is a problem with words, right? It's a problem with the specificity of words and how we communicate, okay? Acknowledged, fine. What I'm suggesting, though, is that in my experience, as a scholar of religion myself, the vast majority of religions I've encountered include some form of supernatural element, whether it be a reincarnational model or something to do with heaven or something to do with a mythological being, a god or an angel or a demon. Or in Buddhism, you might talk about Gautama Buddha, who isn't in fact a divine being, but you could in fact refer to Amitabha Buddha, who is the Buddha of infinite love and who lives in a kind of an extraterrestrial realm known as the Pure Land, right? It doesn't matter which religion you pick. In the vast majority of cases, it includes some kind of metaphysics, some kind of supernatural claim. So just to be clear, that's the kind of definition that I'm deploying when I label something as a religion. So when Mr. Aslan alleges that anti-theism is a religion, I don't think that meets the requirement. I'm sorry, Mr. Aslan, it just doesn't meet the definition that I'm deploying. Now, unfortunately, the video ends here, so he doesn't clarify what definition he's using, albeit I don't suspect he'd clarify his usage anyway, because Reza is an obscurantist. Reza is interested in besmirching and smearing the atheist community, so clarification is not on the cards, I might say. But it's completely baffling to me. I can't think of a definition of religion that could subsume anti-theism. Anti-theists are simply atheists, so they're people who are unconvinced in the existence of gods, but they also just happen to believe that religion is dangerous. And that's it. So there's two tenets to anti-theism. Don't believe in God, religion is dangerous. That's it. Now, if you think that that's enough to label something as a religion, all I can say, dear listener, is that I would be very, very curious to know what definition of religion you're using. Because, and here's my contention, whatever that definition is, it's going to include a whole host of other things that you and I, and that any reasonable person, wouldn't even dream of labeling as religion. Perhaps it might even include football, which is asinine. So with that said, I'm going to leave it there, folks. Did you enjoy this video? Did you appreciate my critique? Or perhaps you have some constructive criticism for me. Whatever the case may be, jump into the comments below and let me know your thoughts. I relish and I look forward to the conversation that happens there every week, week in, week out. Sometimes the conversation continues in the comments for weeks after an initial upload, and I very much look forward to that. Other than that, guys, if you did like the video, please do consider dropping a like on it. It costs you nothing and it helps out the channel enormously. That said, if you do want to take it a step further and support this channel, please consider becoming a patron today. And you can do that by jumping into the description box below, clicking the link, and going to my Patreon page, where you can sign up for as little as £3 a month. Only if you can afford to do so, dear listener. But if you do sign up there, you will gain access to a plethora of perks, bonuses, and extras. In closing, thank you very much for watching another episode of The Most Annoying Religious People, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.